Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here, and today we are talking about the Corruption Sorcerer for PvP in patch 7.4b. Just a little heads up, this is going to be a longer guide, and of course there are chapters in the description below. But in case you prefer reading, or in case you're watching the video after patch 7.5 and you're wondering if it's still up to date, I also have a written version of this exact guide, and that one will have the latest updates, so check out the link to that, also in the description below. Corruption Sorcerer is a very mobile healer with great control tools. It combines very strong healing output, especially for single target, with decent AoE. It has very strong burst heal cooldowns, so you can really keep a single target alive, and also very strong defensive cooldowns. On the side of weaknesses there is not too much, but of course once your cooldowns are down you are quite squishy as a sorcerer. And then the other weakness, at least when compared to the other healers, is that SORC heal is not as good versus dot classes when your teammates are spread out. And that's because you don't really have any HOTS similar to the Cold to Shell or the slow release medpack, but you make up for it when it comes to single target healing. On the latest balance changes and the place in the meta, Corruption has not seen any changes since 7.0. It is good, but it's not overpowered or anything. And as of patch 7.4b, I would currently put it in A tier. And while it's not as strong as Bodyguard overall, on some maps that require a lot of movement, such as Hardball, it is the best healer right now in my opinion, and it's also very fun to play, which is why it's so popular and you see a lot of people playing SORC heals. The first of your key abilities will be Resurgence, which does a little bit of instant healing and then a heal over time on a single target. It has a forgiveness mechanic, meaning that if you renew it before all the ticks have occurred, the target will get the remaining ticks as an instant heal, so no healing is ever wasted. Resurgence also gives you your most important proc, Force Bending. Force Bending is an effect that buffs the next heal you use, more on that later. The next key ability we have is Innervate, which is a channeled ability, and if it crits, you will get a stack of Force Surge, which is very important for managing your force, which of course is the resource you need to heal. And finally, we have Roaming Mend, a so-called smart heal, which means that it automatically prioritizes low targets as long as they are within 20 meters of each other. Now, normally this will only trigger when the target with Roaming Mend takes damage, but with Force Bending, all the bounces will happen immediately. The tactical that I would recommend in 99% of the cases is One for All. This one makes it so Roaming Mend now heals up to 5 targets instead of 4, which just means more healing per second and better group healing, so it's a great tactical. However, if you're playing solo and you want better survivability at the cost of some HPS, then you can try out Endless Barrier. This one allows you to have 3 backlash procs in a row, and so it's very good versus melee heavy teams. The best legendary in my opinion is called Revitalize. It gives you a chance to proc an extra heal when you heal someone with Resurgence on them, so I would recommend you always take that. And then the second one is Unmatched Haste. This one gives you 5 seconds longer duration on your Polarity Shift, which is of course your most important offensive healing cooldown, and also 5 seconds of its cooldown every time you use Force Speed. So very good, particularly in longer fights. A third option would be Dynamic Force. This one just takes 15 seconds off the cooldown of your Recklessness, which simply means you have that available more often. So maybe that's something for an arena, because Recklessness will be ready before your second Polarity Shift will be ready. Empowered Restorer package, which puts a barrier on your teammates when you use your Force Barrier and gives them 25% damage reduction, would be another option, but I tested it and the radius for this is only 5 meters. So your teammates need to be very close to you to have any benefit of this at all. And also the damage reduction is only against elemental damage. And that's why I think this is not really an option that you should try out. For your gear, you can either farm the item rating 336 Thursian gear from PvP, or do what I recommend in my gearing guide, link to that I will also put in the description below, and get a set of legacy bound moddable gear and put a bunch of 336 mods in, which allow you to customize your stats and reuse one set of gear across multiple characters. For relics, you want to run the Power and Mastery proc, also known as the Thursian Relic of Serendipitous Assault and Focused Retribution. As a healer, you can also run the crit proc relic called Relic of Devastating Vengeance, That's because healers benefit more from crit compared to DPS classes because of how bonus healing works a little bit differently to bonus damage. But the difference will be minimal, so you can also just use whatever relic drops first for you. For science, I also tested the relic of Ephemeral Mending, but I found that it performed slightly worse when compared to the other options above. For your stats, you want to get your alacrity to around 2150 to reach the 1.4 GCD breakpoint. That's 3 alacrity enhancements and 3 gold alacrity augments. If you don't have those, you can also just use 4 alacrity enhancements. So once you have that, you want to get your critical rating to around 4900 and then add versatile augments to the remaining gear pieces to boost your mastery. And then finally, the best stim for PvP is the Advanced Curprax Versatile Stim, also known as the Red Stim, which boosts your mastery and power. So for your builds, this is a general build that I run for war zones. On 23, you have a couple of options. You can run Haste, which on Imperial side is the right side option. If you want some more burst to cast the instant double infusion, so if both of the crit can be 100k burst and it can be quite nice. Fueled Corruption, I also like it because it just gives you more HPS on a single target, so that's another good option. And Rally is the best option if you want to farm HPS in like a big AoE Zerg. So this one really depends on your playstyle and if you're queuing solo or with a tank or in a bigger team. At level 27, I think Cloud Mind is a must because there's a lot of burst in the game right now, so we take that. Dark Speed is fun, but if you want to kite, I think there are better options further up the tree. Level 39, Dark Resurgence causes Innervate to spread your Resurgence, and that can be a huge boost to your AoE potential, which is one of your weaknesses compared to the other healers, so Dark Resurgence is a must in my opinion. At level 43, we take Unhindered Resolve, because that one, once you stack it, gives you 6% more damage reduction, and more tankiness is really good in PvP. At level 51, Force Mobility is also mandatory. Innervate while moving is really important, especially because it's a 2.5 second channel, so for PvP you always want to take this. 64, Surging Speed is a good option if you want to kite a lot. Also means you will have Force Speed available more often, so you have Polarity Shift available more often. But if you're fighting teams with a lot of melees, then I would go for Backlash to have the bubble stun. At 68, Phase Walk is one of the strongest defensives in PvP and of story. And at 73, you need to go for Immersion, again for kiting, because breaking roots and slows is really good and also makes you immune to them for the duration, so pick that one up. Just for note on arenas, here I would probably run Haste at level 23 for those double Dark Infusions, and then Backlash at 64, keep everything else the same. Okay. So let's get into the details on how to heal as Corruption Sorc. There's basically 2 different concepts you need to think about. The first one being proactive healing. And what do I mean by that? It simply means healing your teammates before they even take damage. So that can mean before the fight, make sure that everyone is at 100%. Because sometimes people spawn with less than full HP in the second round of Void Star, or at the beginning of the war zone they will drop down too far in Nowhere Coast or Hypergate, causing them to take some fall damage, and as the healer it's your job to make sure everyone is at 100% before the fighting starts. You also want to have static barriers on everyone, except for other Sorcs, because it will override their class barrier, and if they spec into Backlash then it will also not work, so that's why you never bubble other Sorcs. Your static barrier lasts 30 seconds, so you can definitely have it on everyone before the fight. Next, you want to use Innervate to build 3 stacks of Force Surge to help with force management. Then you want to put Resurgence on as many targets as possible because it gives them the protected buff, which gives you some extra armor. And finally, as you spread around your Resurgence, also use a couple of instant Roaming Ments, because whoever gets healed by Roaming Ment will get the resistant buff, which reduces elemental and internal damage. Okay, so once the fighting starts, we move into more of a reactive mode. And what that means is we are going to mostly react to our teammates' health bars and heal them based on the incoming damage. In a very simple way, that just means if they're low, you're going to prioritize healing them. Of course, as a healer, you cannot save everyone. and sometimes you have to decide whether to cast a group heal or focus on a single target. So sometimes you need to let someone die to heal up the group and make sure that your team survives. For reactive healing, you also need to choose when to use your burst cooldowns, and in that case you should always prioritize the targets that will have the highest impact on your team winning the fight. Usually that means that you prioritize healing your tank and also other healers, because they will help your team survive the most. And you should also prioritize good DPS players, as they can take care of the enemies for you, and typically the team with a better DPS will win the fight over time. Taking a look at the single target priority. But first of all, what do I mean by that? Basically, if you look at the list below, it just means that if Roaming Mend is available, use it, and if it's on cooldown, then you go down the list to priority number 2, and if that is on cooldown, you will use priority number 3. So if you're only healing a single target, for example your tank or yourself, then you can forget about revivification and simply go by the list below. Your highest priority will be keeping Roaming Mend on cooldown, because that heals for around 100k total per activation, and 3 bounces of that will go on your main target. So even just for a single target, the roughly 60k you get from Roaming Mend means that this is the highest heal for pushing a single button that you're gonna get. So Roaming Mend really important, make sure you always keep it on cooldown. Second priority is Resurgence. That one with the refresh effect and the forgiveness mechanic will heal for around 50k every time you press it. So really important to keep Resurgence always up. Also for the armor buff that we already mentioned. Third priority for healing single targets is Static Barrier. Static Barrier will absorb 30k damage and put a buff on your target called Sustaining Darkness, which heals for another roughly 20 to 21k whenever you heal your target again or when the bubble collapses. Of course, Static Barrier is also instant and it uses less force than, for example, Dark Infusion, so it will take priority. Dark Infusion will heal for around 50k if you took the Fueled Corruption utility. With Force Bending, it has the same cast time as Static Barrier and Dark Heal, but Dark Infusion uses less force compared to Dark Heal, so it takes priority. Priority 5 then is Dark Heal. It heals for around 50k on a crit, average maybe in the high 30s. You really only want to use this if you have the free and instant proc from Dark Concentration, otherwise this is the best way to mess up your force. And then the 6th priority, and this one surprised me when I tested it a little bit, is Innervate. Innervate will heal for around 60 to 65k per channel, and that's of course on average. But because it's a longer cast time, so it takes roughly 1.5 GCDs, the HPS is actually lower than Dark Infusion with the Fueled Corruption utility, and also less than your Dark Concentration proc Dark Heal. The only reason you want to use Innervate is if all other abilities are on cooldown, you already used Dark Infusion with the Fueled Corruption utility, and also your Dark Concentration Dark Heal is on cooldown. Of course, the other reason to use Innervate is to manage your force, but we'll talk about that in a second. So, if you only care about maximizing your HPS, follow this list from top to bottom. Of course, since we're talking about PvP and the fight requires that you have to move or you will be interrupted, then don't stand there and try to cast Dark Infusion. Instead, use your brain, move around and cast Innervate on the move. If you need to heal a priority target as quickly as possible to keep them from dying in Arena, for example, we prioritize heals that will give us their healing up front compared to over time. And the best combo to use for emergency or burst healing that I found is the following one. So I start with Polarity, which of course gives you immunity to interrupts. And what many people don't know, it will also make your Resurgence tick faster. And then we use Resurgent first, followed by an instant Roaming Mend for roughly 60-70k heal. Next we pop Recklessness and use Innervate, because with Recklessness, all ticks of Innervate will crit, and that's roughly an 80k heal. So Innervate, not really worth it normally, but with Recklessness it turns into one of your best heals. Next we use Static Barrier, again that's roughly a 50k heal, and then Resurgence is of cooldown and you can cast a Force Bending Dark Infusion, which procs an instant free Dark Heal, and if both of them crit, that's a 100k heal right there. Now, Innovate is the only thing that's off cooldown, so we cast that and then finish off the combo with another Resurgence and Force Spending Roaming Mend. So this combo benefits from having 2 Roaming Mends under Polarity Shift, which means that you can pump out about 40k HPS for a brief period, which should be enough to counter 2 DPS, as long as they're not AP power tags with fuel. Okay, so let's say you're healing a group. And now your priorities slightly change. If you're trying to heal 2 to 3 targets, then Roaming Mend will heal the most per activation. So again, going by the list of priorities, as long as Roaming Mend is available, if you're trying to heal between 2 and 3 targets, use it first. Next, Innovate. You might ask, why is it here at all? Well, it's here because if you are using Innovate on a target that has Resurgence, with the build that I recommended earlier, it will spread the Resurgence to all other targets, as long as they don't already have it. Note that it will not refresh it, so if you have used Resurgence and Innovate combo recently, go to the next priority. But the Resurgence and Innovate combo is quite good, and while the burst healing of it is not exactly impressive, the HPS adds up, especially since we are running the Revitalize package. So all those spread around Resurgence ticks will be an extra chance to proc Revitalize. So if you are healing 2 to 3 targets with the Resurgence Innovate combo, it will give you more HPS compared to using Revivification. For healing 4 to 5 targets, the Resurgence plus Innovate combo will do more healing than Roaming Mend, but it's less bursty, of course. And that means people can die before you get all the ticks of Resurgence off. So it's a close call, and the right choice of what to use first depends on your judgment and how high and low people are. But if you only care about pure HPS farm, Resurgence plus Innovate will win if you can use it on 4 to 5 targets. And in the rare cases that you can heal 6 or more targets, Revivification is now your best heal because it affects maximum of 8 targets, so your whole team, whereas Innovate and Roaming Mend affect only 4 to 5 targets. In that case, of course, still Innovate will be your second priority, assuming that you can spread Resurgence to all 4 targets, which is rare but good to know. Next, we look at how to use your Force Spending rotation for maximum HPS. And that again depends on whether you're trying to heal a single target or whether you are trying to heal a group. But overall, I've found that the best uses for Force Spending, at least for most war zones, are Revivification first, because it makes it instant, which means that can't get interrupted, which is very common in PvP. And also it means that the cast of that heal will now use the global cooldown, so it will only take 1.4 seconds instead of the 1.9 when you normally cast it. So using it with Force Spending is an HPS boost of 26%. Roaming Mend is also a good use of Force Spending, especially for burst healing a single target or even multiple low HP teammates. From this you can already see a theme here. In PvP, we really like instant heals and heals that can be cast while moving. So the third best use, in my opinion, for Force Spending is Innervate, but only if you're running low on Force, because the added critical chance will make it more likely to get multiple stacks of Dark Surge. So if you need to manage your Force, feel free to use it on Innervate instead. Of course, if you're trying to burst heal a single target and Roaming Mend is already on cooldown, you can also use your Force Spending to cast a speedy Dark Infusion. Just make sure that you're not going to get interrupted, thereby wasting your proc. Now you know that you want to use your Force Spending on Roaming Mend and Revivification mostly, but if you do that, you have a problem, because both of those are very Force intensive, meaning they cost more Force than you can regenerate in the meantime. And I see a lot of newer SORC healers and even experienced ones run out of Force all the time, at which point they are about as useful as tits on a bull. So you cannot blindly run the same rotation over and over, you will need to manage your Force. And for Corruption, that is based on a couple of things. First of all, you need to know which heal is expensive and which heal is cheap in terms of Force. Cheap ones are Force Barrier, Innervate and Dark Infusion, and all the others pretty much are expensive. With the exception that is of course Dark Heal, which becomes free with the Dark Concentration buff, meaning that you can use an instant, free and 60% stronger Dark Heal once every 10 seconds after casting Revivification or Dark Infusion. And that is also the only time you want to use Dark Heal, unless you are purposefully trying to fuck up your force. But even more important for keeping your force up is that you use Innervate and Consuming Darkness. Because when Innervate critically heals, it will give you a stack of Force Surge, and if you use Consuming Darkness with Force Surge, it will give you a buff called Reverse Corruptions that increases your force regeneration for 10 seconds. And together with not overusing the expensive heals mentioned above, this is the key for healing longer war zones without running out of force. So, when do you want to use Consuming Darkness? Well, of course the general rule of thumb is to use it when your most important heals are on cooldown. So get your high HPS heals out first and then recover your force, not the other way around. Ideally, you also don't want to use Consuming Darkness when you're bursting in Polarity Shift, so make sure that if you're about to go into a burst heal phase, you have some force to support that. And a simple way to think about using Consuming Darkness is to think about your healing rotation in blocks. And even though in PvP that's not always going to be perfectly replicable, it can kind of help you think about it and get in the habit of using Consuming Darkness. So think about these blocks as each block always starts with Resurgence, and there's 2 blocks of them. So for example, you will start the first block with Resurgence and then use Force Spending on an instant Roaming Mend. Afterwards you use a filler, that can be Static Barrier, and just before Resurgence is ready to come off cooldown again, you use Consuming Darkness to manage your force. And then the second block starts again with Resurgence. Next you use your Force Spending on an instant Revivification, and then another filler, for example Innervate, to build some more Force Surge stacks, and then you end the block by another Consuming Darkness. So simply put, just before you're using Resurgence again, recover your force by using Consuming Darkness. And if you do that every time you use Resurgence, then you should never run out of force. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about how to use your defensive cooldowns. And the first one that I always pop whenever it's ready is Unnatural Preservation. And you can pop that pretty much any time. It has a very short cooldown, as long as your HP is not at 100%. It's basically just free HPS. So use that one first. Next we have Cloud Mind. This one gives you 25% damage reduction for 6 seconds, so a rather short duration, but with only 45 seconds cooldown. It's also available quite often. When to use this is mostly when you expect to get bursted. It allows you to stay in the fight. So I would use that first before some of the more high impact cooldowns. Next you can use your Warzone Adrenal. This one will give you 15% DR for 15 seconds, so a bit lower damage reduction but a longer duration. It also has a very long cooldown, I think it's 3 minutes. So in general you want to use your long cooldown abilities later and use the short cooldown abilities first, so you can cycle through them and have them available again sooner. Once Adrenal is down, you can pop a med pack. Keep in mind that you can use the Warzone med pack only once per fight, but nevertheless 35% HP heal can really save you if you're taking a lot of burst damage. Phase Walk is your second best defensive. You want to make sure to place it in a safe location before the fight, and then also click it off and relocate it if the fight moves somewhere else. That is something that's easy to forget, so make sure you don't die to thinking you have your Phase Walk but then being out of range when you need it. One note on the use of Phase Walk, just make sure you use it as soon as you get bursted. If you don't have Cloud Mind or Adrenal or Medpack or anything anymore, don't wait until you're already at 1%. It's better to save your HP bar and Phase Walk early when you eat a stun or something. And finally, Force Barrier. Use that one last. And while you're in Barrier, think of a way to kite. For example, by using a grenade and then force speed to a pillar. Okay, finally some more gameplay tips. The first one we already mentioned, but I recommend to use Recklessness on Innervate because it will crit all the ticks. It adds around 20k to the overall healing. But the most important thing for Innervate is that it crits all the ticks, so it makes the heal stronger, it helps with force management. And if we look at the other options, how to use Recklessness, I tested Roaming Mend, but for Roaming Mend it only auto-crits the first tick. So that's why Innervate is better. Recklessness can also be used on Dark Heal. It increases the burst of Dark Heal if you have Dark Concentration proc from 50k to around 70k. So it can be better for burst because of course Dark Heal is instant with the proc and cannot be interrupted. So it depends. It's kind of like you have these two options. Recklessness on Innovate is a little bit more heal overall, and it also allows you to reliably manage your force. But if you need the burst and you can get interrupted, then you can use Recklessness on Dark Heal. Next tip is clicking off your stun bubble. This one will trigger the heal from Sustaining Darkness, and it also triggers the CC of your Backlash. Quite useful in PvP. Tip number 3, Expunge can be used to cleanse physical, force and mental debuffs such as Force Choke, Mind Trap and Whirlwind. Next tip, you can have endless mobility with the combo of Resurgence, Innovate, Static Barrier, another Resurgence, Revivification, which procs an instant Dark Heal, Roaming Vent and Start Over again. Next tip, in general, you want to position yourself behind your tanks and DPS and as far away from the enemy as possible. Because your first job as healer is not to die. Because if you're dead, you can't heal your teammates anymore. So stay close to a pillar, stay behind your team and don't force speed into melee range of 5 enemies. And if your DPS don't peel for you and end up dying while chasing the enemy, just type Noob DPS get good XD. And of course, the final and most important tip for playing SORC heal is to don't forget to use your pull wisely. Easy classes to face on SORC heal are Concealment Operatives, because you can simply phase walk when they open from stealth, and they don't really have AoE or dot pressure to really kill your team, and you can also just kite them with Overload. Assassins are also relatively easy to face because Hatred cannot kill you 1v1 anymore, as again you can also just kite them out or run into your team, which should take care of the Hatred Assassin pretty quickly. And a similar thing is true for Deception. Now they are of course more threatening 1v1, but your bubble stun can ruin their opener. And of course Phase Walk and Barrier means that you're better equipped at dealing with a burst than a lot of the other classes in the game. Classes to face that can be hard for Corruption Sorc are Lethality Operatives, because they just have so much DPS that can be impossible to out-heal. So while they're not going to kill you 1v1 ever, they're going to slowly kill your whole team and there's not much you can do about it. And of course Mercenaries are also kind of a counter to Sorcs in general, because Electronet means that you cannot use your bubble or Phase Walk, and without 2 of your most important cooldowns you can be a sitting duck. Knowing that, some of the best classes that you want to pair a Corruption Sorcerer with are of course any of the tanks, but also any of the DPSs with a taunt, because they can peel for you, keep you alive. And of course as a healer you can keep them alive, which just is a great synergy of course. And then for Warzones, ideally you want to pair a SORC healer with a bodyguard or an operative as a co-healer, because their HOTS can take some of the group healing pressure off you, so you can focus on what you do best, which is healing single targets. So that's all for this guide. You guys have a question, let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.